When we first began our discussions with NEMA staff and leadership, they were very clear that a major function of the museum was that students from other colleges around campus that had really no contact with the art museum or the College of Fine Arts would often have assignments to come to the museum and simply be exposed to art.
The upper volume is opaque and the lower volume has this perforation so that at night when the lights are turned on in the museum, it completely transforms the space. It reads in a very different way.
That whole idea of discovery after making some effort was something that became fundamental conceptually to the project. And that's what really led to the whole idea of the building functioning in one way during the day and another way at night.
So this museum was an exciting project because we were able to design everything from the architecture to the site, the landscape, the exhibitions, and even the graphics for the client. And that way we could really help them have a project that was seamless from the entire experience, from the approach of the building through experiencing the spaces and then by interacting with the exhibits. It's a project that we wanted to really work on breaking down the barriers to people looking at exhibits and going to a museum in a kind of a passive way. So we developed exhibits that were very interactive. The exhibitions were on mobile carts that moved around the space and could be reconfigured. We had Velcro books that could be attached and detached. And there were chalkboards in the space that we could change messaging and have actually the visitors also add messaging to the project. So in that way, it was a really great opportunity to be very hands-on in terms of the experience of a museum.
The relationship between the site and the architecture for Glass Housing Project is really one that's born of the concept that we derived for the project. And that was something that was speaking to the relationship between the digital and the natural world, and how the digital world was really something that is completely designed, it's completely manipulated by human beings, but the natural world was not so much that, something that was more random, because the client spent his entire day in the digital world, but would eventually, when this house was built, come home to this very natural environment. So what was that relationship between the two? And really, that's how we got to the decisions that the house is of very manipulated materials, glass, steel, and concrete. These are things that are very far removed from their natural state. And that relationship between those materials being organized in a courtyard house was starting to frame how you saw nature through the house, whether it was through the glass or through the opening in the courtyard. And that was something that was not only very important to us, but something that reverberates throughout the entire design decisions throughout the entire house.
So this museum was a really wonderful opportunity to tell the story of a very troubling time of our country's history, and that's when we interned 11,000 Japanese Americans in a camp in the very remote area of Delta, Utah. So we were very fortunate to be able to design a museum that housed the artifacts of that camp and told the stories of the internees. we worked architecturally with the idea of light and darkness. So you walk into the building through kind of a darkened threshold of the charred wood, and then there's even benches to sit and contemplate. Then when you transition into the lobby, the space opens up and it has a diffused northern light. So there's more light, more space. Then as you transition through a hallway and a corridor with exhibitions along the wall, it's a narrowed space that moves you from light to darkness. The exhibition hall is primarily dark with artificial light, very carefully lit exhibitions that tells the story of the camp and the experience of those who spent time there during World War II. And then at the end of that experience of being in the exhibition, you walk out into a courtyard. And there, of course, lots of natural light flooding the space, and you kind of feel the sky and the experience of the light in that place in the United States. And there we also have a reconstructed recreation hall, part of that recreation hall in the courtyard, so people can experience the very modest buildings that the internees had to live in during this time. So the Treehouse project is an urban infill project. It's in a dense, tight urban neighborhood. And we developed a way of living in a busy city context and to create kind of an oasis and a sanctuary for the homeowner. The program for the house was really looking at how we can put a modern house into a more traditional context, but also kind of keep the language of the context. So we analyzed the neighborhood and we looked at the front porch as a kind of dominant vernacular of all the houses in the neighborhood. And we reinterpreted that in a modern way. The house also uses nature in a couple different ways. We've inserted and basically spliced nature into the house in 3 different areas. At the front, in the porch area, in the center of the house with a small courtyard and a pool, and then at the back of the house where there's a private garden and bathing area, outdoor bathing area. So in this way, we were able to bring very private spaces and natural spaces into that project, and then also kind of contribute to the neighborhood with a front porch that speaks to the vernacular of the street and the rhythm and the kind of existing context.
The patron saint for this parish is, of course, St. Joseph the Worker, and he was a carpenter, often portrayed as a carpenter, and over the 2 millennia, he has become or evolved into the patron saint of laborers, craftsmen, and of course carpenters. And so it was important to us that the hand of the craftsman was evident in the finished material of the building, which had a lot to do with why we chose board form concrete for the oval, for the main worship space, wood for the secular portion of the building, and then the flat panel copper for over the 2 altar spaces in the north-facing lantern and in the day chapel. And really, we took the idea of board form concrete to an even higher level because we used a very wet mix of concrete so that it picked up on all the texture of the rough sawn boards. Sustainability is a big part of all of our projects, and our approach to that in this project was that rather than having the parish to heat and cool the main sanctuary, because it's for 800 people, on a daily basis, because they have daily mass, we adopted a sort of campus plan for the parish, where the very much smaller day chapel was where they had daily mass, was something that they would heat and cool on a daily basis, but it was a much smaller volume, so in that way they could keep their heating and cooling costs much lower. When we first got the brief from the Kimball Arts Center, they made it very clear that they wanted the new facility to be very integral with the existing community, and that the corner of Main and Heber was something that was very significant to them. And so our project, our solution for the project, created the lobby was right there. Another important aspect of the brief that the Kimball Arts Center gave us to begin the project was that they wanted several functions to be able to happen in the building simultaneously. So they could have a function in the lobby, function on the roof of the new building, or roof of the old building, as well as in the studios. When you see an aspen grove on the side of the hill, it's actually one organism. It's not a series of individual trees. They're all connected below the surface by a common root system. And that root system is able to take resources from one part of the environment and move it to another part of the environment. So we thought that those two things, the function of the Kimball Arts Center and the way that an aspen tree or an aspen grove works, were two things that really spoke to each other. And the aspen tree allowed us, in many ways, both conceptually and in organizing the program, a way to talk about and address the complexities of the function of the Kimball Arts Center.
We are lucky in that we've been able to work in some of the most beautiful landscapes in the world. This house is an example of that. It's in a beautiful location in the mountains. It is a pristine site, so we wanted to minimally impact the site, and we did that by using a very small footprint for the house and making sure that there's not wasted space in the home, and making it very tight in terms of its program.
We thought about this house in terms of the family, and the fact that a family is not really a static thing. It's something that changes over time with people coming and going from the household, and that really plays into the whole idea of a structure of a house that's multi-generational, something that can be adapted and passed down from one generation to another.
We want to make sure that architecture can evolve and support change in a family life. So those were some of the ideas that we were working with as we developed the architecture for this house. And one of the ways that you can see that is in the material selection, the choice of Corten as a building cladding. That's a material that changes over time. It changes slowly inside, so it's used in the house in a couple locations, and then it changes more rapidly outside as a building skin. It's a wonderful material to protect from fire. It's a material that doesn't have any maintenance or painting that's required over time. So it's something that can support a legacy home that can be passed on from generation to generation. Wabi Sabi is an ancient tenet of Japanese aesthetic culture, and this house we call the Wabi Sabi house because of its the way that it sits in the site, and the way that the two volumes of the house embrace the imperfect. It's not a singular whole. It breaks apart the domestic into the private and the public realm, and the house lifts itself off the foundation of the ground and floats over the landscape.
The two simple volumes that orient along the geographic coordinates and then down the canyon corridor, they kind of gently float above the landscape. What that allowed us to do was create kind of these direct site connections.
There are two volumes in the house, a private volume that looks out on a quiet mountain view with soft northern light, and then a more dramatic view of the public volume that's that's oriented down the canyon so that you see the city lights off in the distance.